Welcome to the Branching Out podcast where we watch Gull jam to the intro. My name is Celine Whitetail.
My name is Gull the Cactus. Hi. This is Branching Out, the podcast where we grow in knowledge together. This week, our topic is El Dorado. Which it turns out has like a shockingly small Wikipedia page. So I was like, oh no, what am I going to talk about? But I figured it out, don't worry.
I don't remember if I said this in the episode last week or not, but I distinctly remember making the point, whether it was on or off air, that is El Dorado a topic that both of us are going to be able to come up with something different about? And if I didn't have this D&D campaign, the answer would be no.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to edit my fucking document, and I have 6 million Google accounts, so I'm in the wrong one for some reason. And it wasn't
I have
letting
that problem. I only have 2 of them, and that's too many for me. I have 4 YouTube channels, and I wish I could get rid of the one that like was auto created when it was like my Google, because I don't use it nor do I need it. Like, I had a YouTube account before YouTube was acquired by Google, so like that's the YouTube channel that is my YouTube channel. And then I was given one, like a default one that is attached to my Gmail that is absolutely worthless and has no purpose other than to auto sign into things like the television application. And I have to every single time go, nope, that's not the one that I use.
El Dorado. So, do you know what that means? El Dorado.
I feel like I knew this when I did my own research. It's like Golden City, right?
The Golden. So yeah, you were basically right. It is Spanish for the Golden, commonly associated with a legend of a city of gold located somewhere within the Americas. And it first kind of came about as a result of a term that the Spanish conquistadors used in the 16th century, El Hombre Dorado, which is the gold man, to describe a zipa or chief of the Muisca, and I might be saying that wrong, and I'm so sorry. Muisca people of Colombia, who had this zipa would perform an initiation rite that involved covering himself with gold and submerging himself in Lake Guatavita, which is one of the potential locations for El Dorado. And also, I noted in my research that part of that rite that the Zipa would conduct involved throwing gold offerings or precious stone offerings into the lake as well. So that is something that comes up in both the movie The Road to El Dorado and also in your thing you're gonna talk about. Yeah, a potential second location for this city came from a rumor in the 16th century regarding the search of a city called Manoa on the shores of Lake Parime, which I also could be completely butchering the pronunciation of. I'm so sorry. Sir Walter Raleigh led 2 of these famous expeditions searching for Lake Parime. This led to Spanish conquistadors searching through much of Central and South America for a city of gold. Also connected to this legend is the legend of the 7 cities of gold, one of which is called Cibola, which led to Francisco Vasquez de Coronado's expedition across the New Mexico territory. This legend, the 7 cities of gold, kind of became mixed with the El Dorado story, and sometimes El Dorado is said to be one of these 7 cities. So that is remarkably the history section I have for this topic. It is pretty short. Usually I go on a yap for a little bit longer. Think you go first this week?
Yes, because my spiel was second. So last week. So as Gull and I mentioned last week, I ran a short-lived D&D campaign in my own homebrew setting. Sorry, the mix for this lo-fi that we're listening to is very abrupt and is not like meshed together Well, also it was just very startling.
Mm.
The music transition. So as Gull and I mentioned last week, I ran a short-lived D&D game in my own homebrew setting, and one of the quests involved the quest to find El Dorado. Gull essentially begged me to talk about this quest line, and being the absolute narcissist that I am, I obliged. And I will essentially do a tell-all of my process for making this game and what the story was supposed to be, is I will likely never run this game again. And I don't really know when I'll mention this, but I will keep, for the main podcast episode, I will talk about how El Dorado inspired me to make this questline, but we will probably do a Patreon only section where Gull and I will just sit and talk about the game as a whole. And she can just essentially ask me any questions she wants about the game. I'll go over the whole thing. So if you're interested in that, subscribe to my Patreon. I would say our Patreon, but we're not making a separate one for the podcast. I have a Patreon where I primarily do NSFW ASMR, but this portion will be in whatever the cheapest tier is, which I believe is the $2 tier. I'll just put it in there, and if you want to take a listen to it and throw a couple extra bucks our way, you can do so. And the NSFW stuff is walled off in different tiers, so don't worry, you will not be subjected to it if it is not your thing. If you just want to listen to the extra podcast content, it'll go in one of those tiers. So a little bit of pre-game knowledge. Gull and I met each other in a 5th edition's Dungeons & Dragons game that we discovered through the r/LFG subreddit, which essentially originally basically was just only for 5th edition D&D, or it was a large majority of 5th edition D&D that was played online. It became very big during the pandemic when people couldn't meet up for in-person games anymore, and it has since branched off pretty considerably. Basically ever since, I won't go into the big details of it, but essentially Wizards of the Coast, who owns Dungeons & Dragons, the property, went a little crazy with their greed at this point about a year ago, and basically said that they owned all of the rights to Dungeons & Dragons, everything to do with it. And if you ever wanted to produce your own content for the game, which a lot of people did, a lot of people would get their foot in the door of game design, or anybody that was a content creator for Dungeons & Dragons and did their own campaigns eventually would make their own book about it every single time without fail. They would put a Kickstarter for people to give them money so that they could create a book that they would then sell, that would have custom monsters, custom classes, subclasses, feats, maybe a couple story pre-gens, and that was like to the point where the market was heavily oversaturated with the stuff. Wizards of the Coast was like, yes, we're changing our license agreement so that we can make money off of everything that is created under our umbrella license. And that caused a lot of people to flee Dungeons & Dragons and go to other game systems, whether it be Pathfinder and Paizo, or find a completely different game system and genre. Like, as an example, the game that I ran was not in Dungeons & Dragons. The game that I ran was under a game called a game system called Savage Worlds, which Gull introduced me to. Essentially, that's what the subreddit is. It was originally a lot for D&D, but now it kind of hosts just all online game things. And over that time that Gull and I played in that game, that eventually lasted for a little over a year and a half, it died out, as most online games do. Over that time, Gull ran a few games of her own, and eventually I decided to try to run a game myself. Originally, I wrote a one-shot that I could have prepared should any of the tables I played at, which I played at a lot of tables back in my D&D high of like 2021. I was at like
We were like 12 games a week.
Yeah, I was at like 15 at my high point a week. I'd try to play like twice a day. Like I said, grew up very secluded, middle of nowhere, very bored, unemployed, played in a lot of D&D games. Originally, I wrote a one-shot that could be prepared should any of the tables I played at or want where the DM would maybe want a week off, or a couple of weeks off even, is I could run this 1 to 3 shot easily enough. And eventually that idea branched off into an entire campaign.
Did it branch out?
Yes. The overall information you need for this story is that the players were the equivalent of CIA agents whose primary job it was to go to different areas that were experiencing supernatural phenomena and try to solve it without alerting the greater population to the evidence of the actual causes. I ran it this way for 1 or 2 sessions until I ran into a significant oversight. Making everyone CIA agents made people constantly ask me, what are the protocols? What are we expected to do? Which, it makes absolute sense from a player's perspective. They want to play their characters to the truest form that they can, and if they are loyal agents, they'll want to follow their orders. But as a DM who wanted people to make their own stories and make their own decisions, it didn't feel right to be constantly asked by the players what should they do. So I pivoted away and changed it so that they were all people who encountered something supernatural that dispelled the idea of the shroud, which was this mystical veil that covered the world, that influenced people and made them rationalize supernatural occurrences. An example being a kaiju that was attacking somewhere would just appear to the population as a massive destructive tsunami. This idea is not original and was absolutely heavily taken from a game system called the City of Mists, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse system game, which has very similar ideas. There's a mist that covers the world. Most humans like rationalize like a monster destroying a building is an earthquake. That's like the game that I played, and then some people could see past it and they could see through the mist. That's where I got the idea from. And it caused them to begin looking into the world of the supernatural and being recruited by someone only known as the Benefactor, a giga-rich influence that aided them in stopping supernatural threats to humanity. I really love to cater storylines to what players do and the details that they give me in their backstory. The general structure of the game was that we would interchange between one main story case and one player story case, with each player getting about 5 personal cases throughout the entirety of the story that would chip away at their own personal stories over the course of the campaign and interweave it with the main story. I created their stories first and then made the main story so that it could loosely fit anything. I outlined the entirety of the campaign with the ability to slot out personal quests and links to the main story in the chance we ever had people leave/join or change characters. The story of Dorado pertains to one of the players, Agent Baker. He told me that he had a boat, that this was like a big part of his story. He had a boat that he spent a lot of his personal time repairing. And the moment that that information was given to me, I knew I wanted to do a ghost ship story as one of his personal quests. And that's where it started. It amounted to, I want the ship that he's been repairing to turn dilapidated and spooky at night and sail along a river at night and then returning to the way it was in the morning before Baker was ever the wiser. That was where my story hook started. I wanted the locals to ask how his new career was going, and he would be confused but learn that the locals had been seeing his ship sailing the same route along the River Tamar, which is located in England because that's where he specified that he wanted his character to be residing, and assumed that he had begun a new life as a fisherman. I don't think that it ever happened though, because my party either loved talking to NPCs or refused to talk to any NPC ever, depending on the session. And in this session in particular, they just refused to talk to anyone. So that was how I had planned for them to like get a lot of the information about what was happening with the boat. I don't remember how it ended up happening, because you guys didn't do that. And I don't recall if I ever gave this information to the party because it either never came up or you didn't ask in a way that it made sense for me to give it to you. But the reason that the boat became a ghost ship was because the wood and parts that he had been using to repair it was from an ancient shipwreck belonging to the soon-to-be-revealed captain. The party decided to sleep on the ship to figure out what was going on, and the ship essentially went back in time before their eyes and became decayed, full of holes, and weaponry in the captain's quarters were now ancient tech. They went to the front of the ship to see a ghostly figure in old Navy garb. Sir Walter Raleigh. One of my favorite things to do was to find real historical events or randomly find facts and weave things backwards and turn them supernatural. As an example, I wanted one of the other characters to save a small town where people were seemingly disappearing. And that was my hook. That's what I knew I wanted the quest to be about. But it wasn't until I essentially randomized. There was like a website that I used that essentially I would put that I wanted 10 US towns or whatever, and they would link to Wikipedia articles. And I would just hit random and I would open all 10 things and I would see if like the population was about the size that I wanted it to. And then I would just read the Wikipedia article. And that is how I stumbled across the town of Churubusco, Indiana, which has a festival every year. Yes, a festival every year called Turtle Days. The reason why it is called Turtle Days is because there is a legend called the Beast of Busco, which is said to be a gigantic turtle that lived in the lake and was like just sworn up and down by, and I believe it was in like the 1800s that this story came out. And they've drained the lake several times, never found this mysterious turtle. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna take that, but the turtle's actually real. And that is how I would make stories like that. And so what I did was I decided that the turtle was originally huge, but some Romani, like a Romani clan hundreds of years ago placed magical sigils that made the turtle small. And the magic was beginning to wane, and because it had not been re-upped essentially, because the power of the sigils was drawn from the people's belief that if they didn't do this Turtle Day festival, the turtle would come and eat them. And that was how like the world building was, is that, you know, a lot of power is in belief. And since the pandemic happened in the real world, obviously the pandemic happened in my world, and they didn't have Turtle Days the year before. So the power of the sigils was waning, and the Romani like descendant saw visions of the turtle destroying the town because they weren't going to hold the festival.
I literally just sent Celine a snippet of my notes where I put in my notes from last year, the runes we could do to Cove? Question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark.
Yeah, there are a lot of question marks, and COVID is in capital letters. So yeah, essentially that's how I would make a story. I knew I wanted to take a real historical figure in the real world, so I started looking up real British explorers looking to see if any of them had any interesting adventures. Sir Walter Raleigh was a real-life English explorer whose greatest desire was to find the legendary El Dorado, which was thought to be a river oasis with sands so rich with gold that the workers or like the tribes women would be like sifting them out, and they would be almost like rocks, like rock sized, pebble sized pieces of gold, and they'd be everywhere. It was in abundance. So I took that real historical event and turned it into a case for the players. But first, I had to solve the problem of, if El Dorado was real in this world, why has no one discovered it yet? That would be solved with a magical item, a compass artifact that was attuned to the shroud and was the only way that could lead ships to shrouded locations such as El Dorado. It was an answer that I could foreseeably use in the future as well, to lead to other shrouded locations should the players ever think of that as a solution. The next problem is, where is it? How could the players get it? And how do I lead them to the object? Well, easy answer to the last question was that Sir Walter Raleigh knew about it. So I made Raleigh unstuck in time. He still believed it was the 1600s, and he was still able to hunt, or he was still on the hunt for El Dorado, and would question them where the compass was. And this would lead them to be like, what compass? And essentially begin that plot point. This would lead them to a couple of recurring characters I wanted to introduce, including an agent of the main villain and a neutral magical artifact dealer whose faction would come back in like 10 levels or so. They would then learn that the compass was found recently in a shipwreck. Again, I forget if this information was found out by the party, but it was the looting of the shipwreck that awakened the ghost of Raleigh in the first place. And they were looking to, it was looking to be bought in a black market deal soon. They interrupted the deal, and after dealing with the buyer, they parlayed peacefully with the black market dealer, and a few people got some cool magical items. They bought the compass and installed it into the navigational panel of the ship. They had into the ship of Baker, and it took them to the location of El Dorado, which was in an extinct lake in Brazil. They learned a legend from the locals that the tradition was to carry around a piece of real gold in tribute to the king of the Golden City. After procuring some real gold, they sailed up the river and passed through the shroud and found the fabled city of El Dorado. It is an eternally sunny lake with water so clear it is almost glass. The sands are made of gold and are littered with fist-sized gems. All over were hazy images of people, mostly indigenous, but scattered with people from all time and space. All time and place, not space. No aliens. Not right now, anyway. All time and place, and they were all showing reverence to a huge man with golden skin and an elaborate headdress sitting atop a throne of gold at the north end of the lake. I wanted to give the party the opportunity to not be greedy assholes and simply give their gold as tribute to El Dorado. And if they did, they would get a cool magical dagger that bypassed all supernatural immunities, including regeneration. If they didn't, well, they were probably going to get rocked because his stat block was pretty beefy and it was intended to be a lesson. That I wasn't just gonna let them be dickheads who could just steamroll their way through this world. There are a lot of very old and ancient things that your guns aren't always going to be able to kill. He was beatable. I didn't want to make it just a stomp if they had chosen to do this, but it would have not been an easy fight. Thankfully, we never found out if that would have been the case, because they were actually quite cordial. Probably one of the only times in this game. And they watched as Sir Walter Raleigh joined the Eternal Worshippers, finally having discovered El Dorado, his life's ambition fulfilled. And that was the quest to find El Dorado.
El Dorado? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
El Dorado is part of a tradition of mythical cities across the world. So, my topic was looking up other mythical cities across the world and different traditions and seeing what they're all about, basically. And like, are there any similarities? What's the deal with that? And it's funny because like in my ETU game, East Texas University, which I ran, I just remember having uh Professor McClanahan talk to the party about how like similarities between cultures across the world at the same time when there was no way for them to know each other like had to mean supernatural shit was happening. And I just remembered that as I was doing this research because it was a bunch of like that this is something that he, the fictional character, would have taken as proof of like supernatural being real, and in that game the supernatural was real. But anyway, um uh so in my list of mythical cities, we have first Shambhala, which is a city or more of a kingdom. I mean, it's kind of like, I guess, a city and a kingdom in Tibetan Buddhist tradition. It was originally named as a place of prophecy where the next incarnation of the god Vishnu would be born, and was prophesied. Oh, and would be the prophesied ruling kingdom of Maitreya, which I could be saying completely wrong. I'm so sorry. The future Buddha. And like what I understand about this concept is that like all kind of traditions of Buddhism have this idea of like the ideal Buddha, like the perfect mega Buddha in the future who would like be perfect and lead the world. I could be really wrong about that, and if that is the case, I am so sorry. But that is what I got from my very brief gleaning as I was researching a lot of different things at once. But a king who was said to have been born in 159 BC expelled 20,000 residents of his kingdom for their continued sun worship rather than converting to Buddhism. And he later asked them to return to his kingdom once he realized some of their wisdom and wanted them back because that would be useful to him. Those who did not return are said to have established the city of Shambhala. And it is said that when the world is lost to war and greed, a great leader will emerge from Shambhala with an army to vanquish the dark forces of the world and usher in a worldwide golden age. Pretty big ideals there, and also pretty like sweeping notions that, you know, it's interesting. We have a lot of like Western traditions of like fantasy that deal in the same sorts of thoughts, but you know, of like a civilization led to ruin, and the great hero that would appear and save everyone, the entire world. So it was interesting to see that, especially because this was like a much older story, and it was in fact a BC story. So interesting. The next one is Xanadu or Shangdu. Probably mispronouncing that as well, but this is the summer capital of the Yuan dynasty of China before Kublai Khan moved his throne to what is present-day Beijing. This, unlike basically all of the others, is an actual location that has ruins that can be visited and is a World Heritage Site. So it's actually a place. Unlike all of the other ones, which are like, we think it's a place and we're gonna find it. One of the first accounts of this place was from Marco Polo, who recounted that this was a city with a palace of gold. And I want to correct myself. One of the first accounts in like Western tradition, you know, outside of the East, like outside of China, because I'm certain that there were plenty of accounts in China about, you know, their own city. But this place was made popular by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was a English poet. He wrote Kubla Khan in 1797, and this is the opening stanzas of Kubla Khan. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alf the sacred river ran, through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers were girdled round, and there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, and here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. And that is the opening to Xanadu. Next is Antilia, which is a phantom island that was reputed during the 15th century age of exploration to lie in the Atlantic Ocean to the west of Portugal and Spain.
Oh, that's so funny that there's a
What?
Phantom Island, and I put a Phantom Island in my quest line
Oh, yeah.
for El Dorado, and it's not related at all.
Yeah. And actually, Phantom Island was like a Wikipedia article that had its own like link, and I didn't click on it because I couldn't go down too many rabbit holes. But like this is a whole tradition of things, especially in the Atlantic, because until the age of exploration, it was just unknown largely what lay on the Atlantic. But yes, it also went by the name of the Isle of Seven Cities, which I thought was interesting, like thematically, because you have the Seven Cities of Gold with Cibola, but not related to that at all. The reason why it has the name the Isle of Seven Cities is because it originates from an Iberian legend during the Muslim conquest of Spain. So apparently, fleeing from the Muslims, 7 Christian Visigothic bishops embarked on ships with their followers and arrived on an island where they founded 7 settlements after burning their ships, so they couldn't, go back to their homeland at all. So this island actually appeared on many maps until around 1492, when things were starting to be mapped better because there was actual, credible proof that things were or weren't there in the sea. It lent its name to the Spanish Antilles, which is, a grouping of islands in the Caribbean. But there were rumors that silver can be found in the island's sands. Next is Shangri-La, which is supposedly located in Tibet's Kunlun Mountains, which was described in the 1933 novel Lost Horizon by James Hilton. He was an English writer. It's supposedly a mystical valley guided by a monastery, which was enclosed in the western end of the Kunlun Mountains, so very secluded. It's synonymous with the idea of an earthly paradise, and the people who live there are seemingly almost immortal because they, know better than the people outside of the walls of the mountains how to live and be at peace and things like that. Next, we have Sierra de la Plata, which is a mythical source of silver supposed to be in the interior of South America somewhere. So castaways from the 16th century expedition of Juan Diaz de Solis heard indigenous stories of a mountain of silver ruled by the so-called White King. Eventually, a Spanish expedition from Peru found the Cerro Rico de Potosi in Bolivia in 1945, which is a massive silver deposit in the Andes. So it's possible that could have been what this was referring to, but still, this idea of this city of white persisted. City of White is something different, actually. Sierra de la Plata is this one. So sorry. The Rio de la Plata and the country of Argentina both take their names from the legend, with Rio de la Plata literally meaning river of silver, and Argent coming from the Latin for silver, which we know from Teen Wolf. Hey, Teen Wolf reference. Next is Veneta, which is a legendary city at the southern coast of the Baltic Sea. This one's really interesting to me because it involves a lot of different cultures that haven't been touched on so far, because a lot have had to do with the Americas and Spanish conquests and stuff like that. But this is in the Baltics, and legends portray the Venetans. I don't really know how to pronounce it.
I think it's Venetian, isn't it?
It doesn't have an I, and it's Venetian is for Venice. So yeah, I don't know. And it could be Venetans. I don't know. I didn't do pronunciation on Venetans, maybe. Yeah.
Your guess is as good as mine, because as we've been seeing in my Rogue Trader playthroughs, I can't pronounce anything correctly.
But these people of this city were seen as having an excessive, blasphemous way of life, and were punished in a flood that took the city to the bottom of the Baltic Sea. And the city can still be seen to reappear on certain days as a warning for the remainder of the population against excesses. So there were numerous individuals from a bunch of cultures who wrote about this from 19 no not 19 from 965 to 1190, so covering a decent span of time. And they included a Sephardic Jewish merchant, a German chronicler, a German missionary, a Saxon historian, the writers of an Icelandic king saga, and a Danish historian. And they all made reference to this same city that had been taken by a flood, by various names across that, 2 to 300 years period. Next is Paititi, which again, I could be pronouncing completely wrong. I'm so sorry. But this is a legend of a lost Incan city. And this is potentially one of the 7 cities of gold. It allegedly lies east of the Andes in the rainforest. And the legend revolves around the story of an Incan culture hero named Inkari, who, after he had founded the cities of Cairo and Cusco, returned to the jungles to live out the rest of his days in Paititi. So that is like basically, this culture hero of this people was this larger than life figure who was so important in their history, and he was able to like retire to safety and peace in this like city of gold. Then there's also La Canela, which is the Valley of Cinnamon, which is a legendary valley within South America where cinnamon, gold, and other spices could be found in abundance. This legend was likely influenced by Columbus's reports of the bounty of the New World as a result of his crossing. Second to last is La Ciudad Blanca, which is a legendary settlement said to be located in the Mosquitia region of eastern Honduras, known by the indigenous Paya people of Honduras as Caja Camasa, or White Town. It is claimed to be a city of great wealth, or a city that cannot be entered. If regular people enter, they cannot take anything out of it, or if they tell anyone where it is, they will be punished, which is interesting because that kind of reminded me of like in your game, we had to give over the gold as an offering, because if we took anything, we would absolutely be punished. And so that was interesting to me that connection was there.
Yep.
And this was also potentially the hiding place of deities who had retreated from Spanish invaders.
Yep.
That's
what happened in my story as well. They were shrouded to protect themselves from invaders and eventually just decided to live in the abundant safety of El Dorado's domain and never left.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting because that idea is kind of throughout a lot of these stories, and it was cool to see what might have influenced you either directly or just like subconsciously based on the stories surrounding the other associated like mythical cities. The last one is Norumbega, a legendary settlement in northeastern North America, which is featured on many 16th century maps until European colonization, and they kind of figure out what is and isn't where on the map. It was alleged that the houses in Norumbega had pillars of gold, and the inhabitants carried quartz of pearls on their heads. It was originally spelled as Oronbega in Giovanni de Verrazzano's 1529 map of America, and the word is believed to derive from an Algonquin language spoken in New England, meaning quiet place between the rapids or quiet stretch of river. Quiet stretch of water, actually, not quiet stretch of river, although they are very similar. So for me, what was interesting among all of these stories and places is there were a few common themes that I saw. It was either a place of paradise or a place that could be considered of being of excess, and it was designed to be a comment on the inability of present outside society to live up to their own expectations, whether that's expectations of wealth, expectations of morality, expectations of just general humanity and like what you could be. Then there was also the theme of a place where native populations of a region knew something valuable about their land that colonizing explorers wanted to find, typically gold or silver. And then lastly, there was a connection to a deity or a hero whose influence could return and help make the world better than it is now in wealth, prosperity, wisdom, peace, etc. And it was so interesting to me that I talked about a lot of different cultures, that obviously there was a heavy emphasis on like legends that came up when the Spanish were conquering South and Central America, because that had a lot of this theme running throughout their history. It was very popular and easy to fall into as like an idea, because this notion of crossing a sea that no one has been across before and what will you find there was obviously very tempting to the imagination. But you really do see this in all kinds of cultures, and this is just a fraction of the like Wikipedia page has a bunch of links on like mythological places. Like there are traditions all over the world and all sorts of cultures that have the idea of these mythological places. I just picked the ones that seemed, this is going to sound silly, but like seems the most like they could have had an actual basis in physical geography or reality, or at least they were believed to. Like there were other things like Atlantis that was on there, but Plato made up Atlantis to be an allegory, so it was clearly never expected to be an actual location. According to him, other people might have believed it was a location, but that was not its origin. Oh, I also had a poem to end, but we can end with the poem at the actual end if there's anything you wanted to talk about before.
I mean, no, not particularly, other than like I said, absolutely love finding like little like not ghost stories, but legends throughout the world, and being like, what craziness can I make out of this? So
For
it's
sure.
it's my favorite part of being a DM and creating stories like that, is I always need a jump off point. I can never just come up with something on my own. I'm not a very original girly. So having a jumping off point is very helpful for me.
But I will just say, like, the grounding of your stories and your world in the real world really helped to make everything that was fantastical seem all the more fantastical, because there were like actual connections to real things and real people and real places. So it made everything that was amazing seem all the more amazing. But yeah, I did have a poem. It's called El Dorado. It was by Edgar Allan Poe in 1849, and it was about the probably a response to, you know, gold starting to be found in North America, and like the gold rushes beginning to happen, and greed, etc., etc. Gaily bedight, a gallant knight, in sunshine and in shadow, had journeyed long, singing a song in search of El Dorado. But he grew old, this knight so bold, and o'er his heart a shadow fell as he found no spot of ground that looked like El Dorado. And as his strength failed him at length, he met a pilgrim shadow. Shadow, said he, where can it be, this land of El Dorado? Over the mountains of the moon, down the valley of the shadow, ride, boldly ride, the shade replied, if you seek for El Dorado. Yeah, in that way, like the reference to the Valley of the Shadow of Death, like even in the 1800s, there was this notion that like, oh, this mythical place, this city of El Dorado was something housing people who had moved on, which I thought was cool because it synced up to your creation, where people who had sought out the city lived there in death or unlife or immortality as spirits. And I thought that was just really cool.
Yeah, it's crazy how you can accidentally make connections to things you never intended to do.
Right. And that's so interesting you say this, because I wanted to say this earlier and I forgot. But the accident part is the part that I'm going to challenge. And I think there's something just innately human about wondering about what we could be, or wondering about the best of humanity, or the most opulent, or the wisest, or the most prosperous. And this idea that like there could be this supernatural place that is emblematic of what humanity could be and could build. I don't think it's an accident that that appears across cultures across the world, because it's just human to wonder how good could we be. And I think there is a shared like part of our spirit that is just like transcends language and transcends culture and location. And I think it's really cool. And you're part of that tradition too.
No, I am not a human. I am a deer.
Fair enough. Speaking of being a deer, who are you?
I'm Celine Whitetail. I'm a deer VTuber, and you can catch me everywhere and anywhere on the internet. I stream 7 days a week, 8 a.m. EST on Twitch. I just put out my schedule for this week, and it's a lot of Fansly streams, a lot of Twitch streams. Still putting out the usual content. You can follow me. You can follow me everywhere. It's Celine Whitetail, literally everywhere. And again, if you want to listen to the extended version of my research, you can find it on patreon.com/Celine Whitetail. At the $2 tier, you can listen to probably us ramble about D&D for half an hour. Honestly, okay, we made it to an hour and a half. I was like, honestly, I might just have to keep the whole episode in because we didn't talk for very much. We kind of unfortunately gave ourselves a very strict time that we could record because we waited until right before Gull's D&D game to record this. So you have to go very soon. So I'm gonna wrap this up and not yammer. I'm not really doing much this week other than streaming in Fansly, which is also streaming. So lots of streaming I am doing this week. Come hang out and come watch me on Twitch or on Fansly, your choice.
Or both. Yeah.
What are you doing?
And I'm Gull the Cactus. I'm being Gull the Cactus. I am Gull the Cactus on Twitter, on Twitch, on YouTube, but I don't really use that except to comment. On Reddit, where I'm writing ASMRs. I put out 3 different posts, I think, last week for ASMRs that I had written and just not posted. So check those out if you are so inclined. And this week I am drawing some art for you. I'm trying to work on some commission stuff and just trying to, maybe stream once. That's the goal. Stream once.
All right. Well, I will let you go because you got D&Ds to go to. I'm Celine Whitetail.
Yeah. That was the part that I was trying to get us to.
I was waiting for you to stop talking so that I could do it, and you just never stopped, so.
I'm so sorry.
I'm Celine Whitetail.
And I'm Gull the Cactus. And remember,
keep learning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.